All right, so talking about drop NA kind of builds into this whole is not null idea. Drop NA is when we're going to drop null values from our table. We can use the method something like this. Well, let's go into our code. I think this one is useful to see in our code. If I do, so let's get rid of this stuff for now. I think we might come back to it. What we're going to say here is we want to do, in this case, we want to do df, let's do print df.drop NA. Actually, let's see how this one works out. So what we can tell out of this, and what we're getting from this, is we can really tell from the shape. If you look at the shape of this thing, there are 385 rows. Drop NA has gotten rid of any of the rows that contained our missing data. So by default, it will look through and say, like, if it's not there, drop it. Okay. And it says there's 8 columns. If we really want to like compare this, we could check out just .shape. And then we could also say print df.shape. And if we run this, we can see originally the the data frame had 365 pieces of data, 365 rows, and 358 rows for after we drop things. So we can know that we are dropping the appropriate 7 things. Okay, so now this gets into like that's all well and good. That means we're just going to drop the entire row if there's any piece of missing data in there. But also, and you can do this for columns too. Let's see if we would do that for columns. I think we could do the same thing if we say, instead of df drop NA, that means we're looking through the rows. But if we set this to be axis 1, if we set this to be axis 1, then we're going to look through the columns. And we're going to say drop NAs out of the columns. So when we run this, df.drop NA axis is equal to 1, you can see here, like, it's a slight difference. Before, when we were dropping without anything, and then we're doing axis 0, we were dropping rows. And here, we're looking through the columns. So you can see we kept the same number of rows. We just dropped that one column because it had some missing data in it. Okay. So that's a little bit, yeah, so that's how we drop NA. But, okay, the issue here is, like, I think this kind of leads into, well, do we want to drop that entire column just because it's missing some data? It's probably like not the best idea because like, well, we're going to get rid of all that other data. And so you really need to pick and choose when you should remove data and when you shouldn't. And this is really going to lead into the next exercise when you're doing cyclist information, because there will be some rows that are entirely like missing all of their data, or rows that are missing all of their data. But there might be some where it's like, well, there's half the data, but not all of it. And so we need to decide like when are we going to remove stuff? And we can write this into our code by saying when we do drop NA, we can decide whether we should drop it by saying how. Like, how do we decide whether to drop the thing? Should it be, and there's really 3 options. For how, we either say any, which is the kind of the default version of NA, where it's like, if there's any missing values, drop it. Or we could say all, which means only drop the table, only drop values from the table if it's missing all of them. So if we run this on this, we can see, in this case, we're not actually going to drop any rows, any columns from this because, yeah, I mean, some of them still had data in it, so we're not going to throw them all out because of that. So that's kind of like the binary. Either we drop it if there's a single one, or we drop it if there are, like if there's a single one, that's any. Or we decide to drop it if they're all, that's the other option. There's also a different version here. We don't use this, you don't need to use this in the assignments, but it might be interesting for your projects. We could say thresh, as in threshold, and say, I'm going to drop them if there are more than 3. Like my threshold might be 3. If there are only 1 or 2 missing values, don't worry about it. But if there's 3 or more, let's drop it. So there's different options for like when should you drop something out of the table. So I'm going to lead a little bit. Into exercise number 65. So in 64. In this exercise, we're going to go through and like get cyclist data, and we're going to be dealing with this CSV of all these values. To be clear, like this is a row. This is a column. This is a column. This is a column. One thing we notice in here is that they are separated by semicolons. So when I load up my CSV, I need to say my separator is a semicolon. I'm going to just like a little bit with this. I'm going to try and leave this for you, but you need to. So in this exercise, I think what you're trying to do is remove any pieces from the data set that have empty rows. So I don't want to give you too much here, but like that's if the how is equal to all. And also if there's any columns that have only missing values. So you need to be really careful. you need to be really careful about like which ones do you drop. Only drop the ones that are entirely empty. And then at the end, you're just going to return this cleaned data set. What else I was going to say? I was going to say one other thing in here. Oh, yes. When we do drop NA, either in this one or if we go back to this. No, that's not the one. Well, now I'm just looking all over the place. When we do drop NA, it's not actually modifying the Panda thing. It's just kind of returning you the object, but it's not actually modifying the contents of the data frame. So if you want to, so like you just say df drop NA. Yeah, if we do that, that's just going to, like we could print that. It's going to return the like clean data frame that's missing those things, but it's not actually going to update df. We'd have to say df is equal to df is equal to df.drop NA. And then we're kind of updating the value of df to be whatever we get back from this. An alternative option for this is in place. We can say inside of the drop NA, we can say in place is equal to true. And that means we're going to replace the old data frame with this new one. So it's kind of like this, these two things, in place is equal to true, and this are identical. But just to be aware that drop NA does not modify the contents, it just shows you what the missing parts are. All right, I'm gonna stop it there, and hopefully that's enough to get you started with this one.